It's Monday, January 15th. So, of course, a lot of people are out celebrating Martin Luther King Jr. and his legacy and all along those lines. And we may be talking about that as well as some other things going on in the world today as well. But definitely there's a lot going on. Apparently, Taiwan has lost their ally Nauru, and they're accusing China of post election ploy. So, definitely they have got them things going on in their area as well. And the president says that Iceland faces the daunting period after lava from a volcano destroyed homes in a fishing town. So that's something else that we're seeing in the news. And of course, a lot of people will be paying attention to Iowa on this particular day as the caucuses are going on as well. So that's the last time I checked. I think Trump had a sizable lead, but Nikki Haley was making some inroads as well. So we'll see if those inroads are enough to keep her in the race and all in that space. So definitely, I was watching on a podcast or listening to a podcast yesterday, and Chris Sununu, the governor of New Hampshire, was definitely throwing his support behind Nikki Haley and saying all the reasons why she needed to be the nominee. But it also said that he would support whoever was the nominee against President Biden. So that was definitely something that I was listening to on, I think that was either yesterday or on Saturday. And a terror attack in Israel has left one dead and more than a dozen injured, according to what police in that area have said. A Ra'anana car ramming attack scene as Israeli emergency service confirmed the injuries and the death there. So definitely looks like there was a stabbing terror spree across Ra'anana. So definitely that is something that's still going on with the Middle East, still in various conflicts and all along those lines. And the Houthi missiles attacked U.S. warships after American and British jets struck Yemen for the third time. So definitely there's a lot of conversation around that, as that was just off the coast of Yemen in the Gulf of Aden, according to UK military. So definitely the Red Sea, according to one report, has become extensively militarized. That was in the Quint, and an immediate ceasefire is needed. And apparently, Hamas airs a propaganda clip of hostages now Argamani and Yossi Sharabi and Ite Servetsky. So that is something else that is going on, as they were apparently teasing the fate of those three hostages in a very disturbing propaganda video. And Ukraine, that war is still going on as well, says it shot down a Russian A-50 spy plane. And definitely that is something that it is saying that it did, because it said it destroyed a $330 million Russian spy plane and airborne command post. So that is something else that is going on, is that war is getting ready to enter into the end of its second year. So believe it or not, it's been 2 years that that war has been going on. So a lot of these wars last longer than maybe people were expecting, and all in that space. And despite U.S. pressures on Israel, casualty count in Gaza remains high. The Israeli war on Gaza, apparently 67 were killed and dozens wounded in an Israeli attack. And Israel pounds targets across Gaza and awaits Hamas words on those three hostages. So that's something else that we're seeing in the news. And France's Reunion Island is on the highest alert as Cyclone Baleil barrels in. So I know that Rick's getting ready to head to that way. So hopefully he will, the weather will get out of there before he gets in there, because he's actually heading there for a very significant event. And apparently the flooding hit the Reunion and is heading for Maritas. So hopefully everything will be in good shape by the time that Rick and his wife head that way to see the daughter and the I think the daughter's husband, if I'm remembering correctly, and the newborn child that might be on the way as well. But Rick can correct me if I'm wrong about all of that and all along those lines. And King Frederick the Tenth is visiting the Danish Parliament on his first formal workday as Denmark's new king. So he was cheered by thousands as he took the throne there in Denmark. So Queen Mary's coronation look was apparently a majestic white draped dress and rubies, which matched the Danish national flag. And Britain declares anti Semitic Hezbollah Tahrir as a terrorist group. So they are definitely looking at that, and Home Office will be banning the Islamist political group Hezbollah Tahrir as well. So definitely that's something going on. If you're wondering about the discrepancy among the rich and the poor, apparently the world's 5 richest men have doubled their wealth since 2020, a report finds. So the world's top billionaires, winners in an economy built to redistribute wealth upwards, according to an expert coming out of one of the France stations. So far, it's a great decade for billionaires, according to a new report. So it's being definitely interesting to see what Nick and others have to say about that. And North Korea's first 2024 missile test was conducted with remote U.S. targets in the region. North Korea says it tested solid fuel missiles, and it claims another successful test of its hypersonic glide missile. So that is something else that is going on. And apparently, South Africa's genocide case against Israel has global support, according to a finance minister. And Namibia criticizes German support for Israel over the ICJ genocide case. So the South African legal team returns home to a very raucous or rapturous welcome. So that's something that a lot of people were looking at, and I guess that they were getting some support in their home country. And Nicaragua has freed a jailed Catholic bishop and 18 priests and hands them to the Vatican. So apparently, Nicaragua expels 19 imprisoned Catholic clerics to the Vatican. And the Maltese leaders is demanding a removal of the Indian military by mid-March. And I do know that Shaquille had said that he had visited that area and all along those lines. And the World Economic Forum for 2024 in Davos has kicked off, and the global crises are set to dominate the gathering of business leaders and all in that space. And apparently, Ukraine is discussing its peace formula at the World Economic Forum in Davos, and Russia's ally China is needed apparently to end the Ukraine war, according to a Swiss diplomat. So more countries are joining talks on the Ukraine peace formula, but not China. So that's why they're saying that China needs to be there. And apparently it's a big Chinese delegation, and that apparently is unnerving some of the U.S. diplomats at Davos. So China and Switzerland have signed a declaration with a view to expanding trade, and China is ready to deepen its mutually beneficial cooperation with Switzerland, according to the Chinese premier. And apparently there was one of those lovely royal weddings, but this one was in Brunei. So there was the royal wedding of Brunei Prince Abdul Madin and what some people are saying is a commoner, Anisha Rosna. So definitely there's all kinds of lavish celebrations going on in that area. And of course, there might be people that are singing about that as well. And apparently, Martin Luther King Jr. spoke openly on the Arab-Israeli conflict in one of the sermons, and I'm going to see if I can't find what that sermon was about and what he said in that particular sermon. We might even play it in doing this particular show and everything. I know I was also thinking about doing the Have a Dream speech, but China calls for an independent, fully sovereign state of Palestine, and definitely they're calling for Gaza Peace Conference and Hamas to disclose the fate of the Israeli hostages. So definitely they're urging larger scale Gaza Peace Conference as conflict escalates, and all in that space. I've got Rick Rosner with me. I think Nick Palveda is here as well. We'll see if anybody jumps into the conversation. It is a day that a lot of people took off and all in that space. But how are you doing? I understand you got that trip. I hope the weather.
Well, we're not supposed to talk about that. You're not supposed to tell people you're leaving. Because then they maybe like stake out your house. But
we don't want them to. We don't want them doing that. No, you're going to stay here. You'll be back here on tomorrow, and the show will be fully functional and all in that kind of way. So
I looked up some stuff about MLK to prepare for the show, and I was surprised to find out there's a ton of pretty persuasive evidence that it was a conspiracy that assassinated him. That his widow took it to court, and the bullets didn't match the gun, and a jury found that there was a conspiracy, and uh, the evidence around the JFK assassination, whether it was a conspiracy, is pretty, could go either way and maybe leans towards like a lone lunatic. But I was surprised to see that the MLK evidence weighs in favor of conspiracy. And we know the FBI was messing with him. Under J. Edgar Hoover, they did not hesitate to try to blackmail people.
Oh, no, not at all.
And they had bugged they were surveilling him. And I just have one more thing to say, just off the top of my head, which is, among the things I think the FBI found when they surveilled him and tried to blackmail him was that he had a few affairs, right?
I think that they found that, and I mean, there's a lot of things that were going on in that space.
But I would say that this would have been his 95th birthday. He was born on this day in 1929. If he were a younger man, he was killed before he even made it to age 40. But if he were the age he was in the 60s now, I don't think he'd be messing around. He seemed like a very reasonable guy, and there were a lot more people, I think, messed around during that era than during this era. Because the press didn't cover it. We know that JFK had a room in the basement of the White House dedicated to his extramarital stuff. And it was just, it was just more of life back then. And I feel like people do that less, and MLK, being a smart, man, probably wouldn't have gone for the potential trouble of that.
Yep. And even what's going on now, apparently his one of his daughters had a comment around that and everything, because definitely there were some people that were interested. Apparently actor Amy Schumer shared King's 1967 rendition of the particular sentiment that was definitely pro-Israel and all along those lines. And definitely Mike Huckabee, the Arkansas governor, claimed that King would be appalled by the Black Lives Matter movement. And definitely King's statement that Israel is a beacon of democracy, which he repeated several times, including during a 1968 speech at the Rabbinical Assembly 10 days before he was assassinated, have been prominently discussed in the aftermath of the Hamas terrorist attack on October.
I mean, that's really taking somebody's words out of context, since he said them, 55 years ago?
55 years ago, and just last week, actor Amy Schumer shared King's 1967 rendition of that sentiment on her X account. The whole world must see that Israel must exist and has the right to exist, and is one of the greatest outposts of democracy in the world, King says in the widely shared video. But then Bernice King, who is King's daughter, tweeted that while her father was ardently against anti-Semitism, I am certain he would call for Israel's bombing of Palestinians to cease, for hostages to be released, and for us to work for true peace, which includes justice. So apparently we don't have to imagine what King thought about Israel's relationship with the Palestinian people. He spoke for himself. King was indeed clear in his defense of the Jewish homeland. But in addition to those off-quoted positions, there was a rare 1967 TV interview where his nuances and understanding of the complexity of the crisis were in full display, unflattened by social media one-upmanship. So there wasn't a lot of that, back and forth like there is now. So in the summer of 1967, apparently King was planning a monumental trip to Israel, intended to preach at the Mount of Olives and pray with thousands in Jerusalem and Galilee. And that would be his Moses moment, leading African-American people to the promised land. But just before his planned arrival, Israel launched the 6-day war against Egypt, Syria, and Jordan, gaining territory but killing thousands, and Israel would lay claim to the entirety of Jerusalem and seize control of the Gaza Strip, West Bank, and the Sinai Peninsula, eventually returning Sinai to Egypt after a peace treaty was signed in 1979. And Martin Creamer has a book called The War on Error, and in that book, this series of unfortunately timed events would lead King to come to under pressure to take a public stance on the 6-Day War, and he did on June 18th, 1967. So there was an ABC show called Issues and Answers, and King said it would probably be necessary for Israel to give up the territory it had conquered to allay the bitterness of the Arabs. And the full quote is, I think for the ultimate peace and security of the situation, it will probably be necessary for Israel to give up this conquered territory, because the hold on to it will only exacerbate the tensions and deepen the bitterness of the Arabs. So
yeah, I grew up with Israel being 3 times the size it is now because they had the Sinai Peninsula.
Right.
And I'm Jewish. And I support Israel, but I don't really support the way Israel is prosecuting this war. I mean, they I don't know, through arrogance or incompetence, they ignored like huge signals that it was coming. Netanyahu, his political future looks bad as soon as the war ends. He's got some really, really bad right wingers in his cabinet, and even if you're okay with what's happening in Gaza, which I'm pretty much not, I feel like it could be prosecuted with being less killy of the innocent. What's happening on the West Bank is less defensible. The West Bank is the east side of Israel, right, which has been historically held by Palestinians, and the right wingers have let in extremist settlers. Netanyahu's government has tolerated right-wing extremist settlers conducting a campaign of terror across the West Bank, which is, I think, less defensible even than Gaza, in that it's been just going on forever.
Yeah, no doubt. No doubt. We've got Toby with us as well. Actually was on a house room earlier, and I had an interesting thought about the money wealth, and I mentioned what's going on with the billionaires increasing their money. But before I get to that, Toby, what are your thoughts around MLK? It is MLK Day and everything, so we just kind of reflecting. I know that one of the things that I am oftentimes shocked about, and I've said it on a couple of shows and a couple of things that I've been on over the last couple of days, is that a lot of the things that he was dealing with, whether that is banking injustices or homelessness or a number of these other issues, are still very pertinent in the year of 2024 and the 21st century. But I just wanted your take, because the fact that he passed away some more than 50 years ago, and we're still talking about a lot of the issues, including redlining, that he was fighting against. But I'd love to hear your thoughts around that.
I was gonna, what Rick had just said, because what was interesting is that, which is something I completely agree with, and what Fareed Zakaria actually did a whole piece on that, and I had brought it up. I was going to share that before we even jumped to those thoughts, because it was on the same string of consciousness that we were just talking about. Just to touch on MLK, because we can jump back to MLK right afterwards. Mm-hmm. But just to touch on MLK, the irony is that if MLK were alive today, he would be seen as part of Black Lives Matter, and he would have been seen as a radical and an anti-Trumper and a woke individual. Yet he has a holiday that many of those same individuals that use those terminologies are complaining about exactly what he fought against. It's just wild that they're wanting to use his name and celebrate and him as an individual, yet they're banning books about him and banning books about the things that he went through, banning books about that time in society. They want to make America great again, but yet they're not realizing what they're going back to and the things that have been fought for. And yeah, there's just a lot of it with it, which I always find, the humanity that he fought for is the humanity that would have been seen as woke today, which is crazy to me. But anyway, I did want to, before I go down that stream of that part. I wanted to touch on what Rick was just talking about, because
And you had a video, so we can bring the video or bring the screen up and everything. So there we go.
now I just got to hit play. There we go.
This is GPS, the Global Public Square. Welcome to all of you in the United States and around the world. I'm Fareed Zakaria, coming to you live from New York. On today's program, the US and Britain strike the Houthis in Yemen, and the strife between Hezbollah and Israel heats up. Is this turning into a war between Iran and its proxies on the one hand and the West? We'll tell you all you need to know. Then, China's eagle eyes were watching across the strait as Taiwan voted yesterday. What did they see? Will the results bring us closer to conflict or further away? I'll ask an expert. Also, escaping from North Korea is an incredibly dangerous prospect. Would-be defectors are likely to be tortured or killed if caught. We will bring you an extraordinary inside look at the journey out of the Hermit Kingdom with the people behind the new film, Beyond Utopia. But first, here's my take. It's now almost 3 months since Benjamin Netanyahu's government's ground invasion of Gaza began. And it is time to ask some hard questions. Has it been proportional to the damage that Hamas inflicted on Israel? Has the Israeli government been careful to avoid civilian casualties? Was there another path? I ask this as a supporter of Israel, a country that I believe has been a remarkable success in an environment that was for decades deeply hostile to it, and where some countries like Iran remain opposed to its very existence. I'm also dismayed and appalled by the rise of anti-Semitism across the world, which is a powerful reminder as to why Israel was founded in the first place. This week, hearings in the International Court of Justice began to determine if Israel's government is committing genocide against the Palestinians in Gaza. I think the charge is invalid. There is no systematic effort to exterminate Gaza's population. If there were, given the vast disparity in power, Israel would surely have killed many more than 23,000 people, though of course that number is still staggeringly high. The death toll, I should note, comes from the Hamas-run health ministry in Gaza. Genocide is an incendiary accusation that should not be used loosely. Nevertheless, some deeply troubling facts may emerge about Israel's bombing campaign. Israel suffered a brutal terrorist attack on October 7th and had the right to respond forcefully. But consider what it has done in a small territory housing 2.2 million people, half of whom are children, and of which, by Israel's own estimate before the war, only 30,000 are Hamas fighters. A Wall Street Journal analysis of Israel's bombing campaign notes that by mid-December, nearly 70% of Gaza's 439,000 homes and about half of all its buildings have been damaged or destroyed. Much of the water, electrical communications, and healthcare infrastructure that made Gaza function is beyond repair. Of Gaza's 36 hospitals, only 8 can still accept patients. UN monitors report that more than 2/3 of all schools have been damaged, as have several churches and over 100 mosques. The Associated Press reports that, according to experts, in roughly 2 months, Israel caused more destruction in Gaza than the Battle of Aleppo in Syria or the razing of Mariupol in Ukraine, and killed more civilians than the US and its allies did in a 3-year campaign against ISIS. Israel's campaign has exceeded proportionally the destruction of the Allied bombings of Germany in World War II, and as the University of Chicago's Robert Pape notes, is one of the most intense civilian punishment campaigns in history. CNN reported in mid-December that US intelligence estimated that 40 to 45% of the 29,000 bombs Israel had dropped were unguided, prone to cause greater collateral damage. Indeed, a top Israeli admiral acknowledged before the ground invasion began that while the IDF was balancing accuracy, right now we are focused on what causes maximum damage. Prime Minister Netanyahu has evoked the biblical story of Amalek, in which God tells the Israelites to kill every man, woman, and child, destroy all property, even kill every animal in retaliation for a surprise attack. The Committee to Protect Journalists reports that more journalists have been killed in the first 10 weeks of the Israel-Gaza war than have ever been killed in a single country over an entire year. The United Nations reports that more UN aid workers have been killed in Gaza than in any other conflict over the 78 years of the organization. It's possible that some of these numbers are misleading, but are all of them coming from various sources wrong? This military campaign is being perpetrated by a deeply unpopular government in Jerusalem that is trying to salvage its reputation. Polls since the start of this conflict have shown that most of the Israeli public has lost faith in Prime Minister Netanyahu. A poll that came out last week found that only 15% of those surveyed wanted Bibi Netanyahu to keep his job after the war. 69% wanted elections as soon as the war ends. It is awkward to note this, but Prime Minister Netanyahu has every incentive to keep the military campaign going in the hope that his day of reckoning can be postponed, if not put off indefinitely. Having bungled the strategy toward Hamas before the war, he is trying to use maximum force now as political compensation. Israel is a democracy and an open society, and precisely because of that, it will one day have to ask itself whether it acted appropriately in the heat of its anger and sorrow after October 7th. Friends of Israel should help it ask those questions now, so that it does not look back on this episode with shame and regret. Go to cnn.com/for.
Oh, hold on a second. I had you were talking to somebody, Rick, so let me get you off mute. Go ahead, Rick.
At the very least, Netanyahu does have to go when the war is over, because not only has he prosecuted the war in a very killy manner, but he is the face of ignoring the incredibly obvious warnings. I just read a huge article yesterday on they have mostly women Army soldiers in these observation posts, and it's their job just to watch closed circuit TV like 24/7 to note what's happening on the border between Gaza and Israel. And these women were going crazy watching all these training exercises and telling their superiors and telling each other and telling their families that this attack was coming, and they were ignored.
Yep, definitely. There's a lot of that ignoring, and definitely that's something that folks have to be thinking about as well, is how that's being ignored. Maybe Nick will come up on this question and everything, but I have just a slight pivot, because I know that part of this, what Dr. King talked about, was not just the race war, but also the class difference that exists between the rich and the poor. And I did mention earlier how it was a great year last year for the top 5 billionaires and all along those lines. And I was in a clubhouse room yesterday, or actually earlier this morning, and there was a gentleman that was saying that he thought that there was a shortage of the entrepreneurial spirit here in the United States and everything. And he felt that there was a kind of like a pushback against entrepreneurship, and that a lot of people didn't know how to be entrepreneurs, and a lot of people wanted to go to work in kind of like the 9-to-5 setting and not pursue entrepreneurship. So I was wondering if y'all think that that is true, and also y'all's thoughts around the rich getting rich and the poor getting poorer, which is, I know, something Dr. King would not be in favor of at all along those lines. But it was quite an interesting conversation. The gentleman, and I'm hoping to get him on at some point, has written a book about the death of the entrepreneurial spirit here in the United States. And I think he was even arguing around the West as well. But I was just wondering.
Toby's muted, but he should go next, because I've been talking a lot.
Oh, no, you're fine, Rick. I don't think there's I think that we have more options in terms of ways to do entrepreneurial things. Mm-hmm. And I don't think that there's a death, but there's a security and a job. And that is something that a lot of people still hold on to, is that security of, this big business. And yeah, But I don't think that there's a death of the entrepreneurial spirit. I mean, if you look at all the content creators that are out there, the TikTok people, so on and so forth, people are finding ways to try and create positions and jobs. It's just, we aren't highlighting them as much because I guess there's a broad array of them now. So it's harder to, like, there's so many coders that are out there that are creating AI stuff, honestly, there are people out there making money off of actually just utilizing AI to create jobs. There are people utilizing AI artwork. There are people that are making, that are cartoonists to animators but I mean, yeah, there are the big businesses that are still holding on to jobs. I don't think that there's a death of the entrepreneurial spirit. I think there's more options. So it's hard to say, well, this person, you're going to be a businessman and open up a law firm. Yeah, that's old school. What about the kid who has his business making YouTube videos that now has 10 people beneath him paying them $50,000 a piece?
Yeah, to tell me, I think one of the things, like I said, this guy makes, I think he quoted some decent amount of money. I forgot what it was. I want to say it was in the tens of thousands, if not hundreds of thousands, and is actually handled by the same publishing house, or is working on a deal with the same publishing house as J.K. Rowling. But it's kind of like that argument with musicians. The Weekend Warriors is kind of his argument, was that a lot of people were just kind of like putting their toes in the water and not fully swimming into the kind of entrepreneurial lanes, because we all have to eat, we all have to survive and everything. So he was finding that a lot of those people needed to just kind of like dive full force into the waters and not kind of dip their toes in the water and everything. And that's where I was kind of pushing back against him, because I was like, you got to survive and you got to pay your bills and everything along those lines. But yeah, he wanted people to just kind of like jump full head into the waters of entrepreneurship. And I think that's what he was arguing.
Shark Tank is one of the most popular shows out there for the past 10 years, which is all about being entrepreneurial. Right. And a lot of people are. We've got a gig economy, but a lot of the billionaires and the big companies, the Amazons, have tactics to suck the juice out of your entrepreneurial efforts. But when you sell on Amazon, you get price squeezed. If you write a book that you e-publish, they'll take 30%. And there are all these tactics that this gig economy goes hand in hand with these tech billionaires doubling their fortunes in the past 4 years. It's pretty exploitative. Saying somebody's entrepreneurial is an excuse not to give them benefits and to give them a fake job like Uber. Driving Uber is not really a job because you get no benefits, and if you factor in all your costs, you're probably making less than minimum wage.
What's your take on that, Nick? You're on mute and everything. What's your take? You're in the entrepreneurial lane and everything. You've actually got this business, which is a entrepreneurial business, and even your pension business is entrepreneurial as well. But do you think that there is a pushback against that entrepreneurial spirit in the United States?
Yeah. I mean, the thing is, Mark, what Rick is saying is correct, that the problem with the larger companies, when somebody has a good idea, they can buy you out, squeeze you out, or basically kill you. You have a lot of problems there. Problem number two is the odds of winning the lottery are like 1 in 200 million. The odds of winning a startup company is 1 out of 400. So if you look at it from an odds standpoint, you're better off to actually start your own company. But you have to realize the odds are stacked against you. Even the area that I work in, financial services, Mark, when we bring they call them a producer. When you bring somebody in and goes, I want to be a financial planner. I want to be a financial planner. For some reason, they heard being a financial planner is a great thing to do. The odds of their survival in 1 year is 50-50. So if you hired 2 people, one's going to be there, the other one's going to be gone. By the way, these odds have been around since I've been in the industry for nearly 40 years. So, and then Here's the other thing. For 5 years, if you hired 10, one would be around. You have a 1 out of 10 chance to survive for 5 years. Why? And I'm talking when you're in financial services and you're a financial planner on your own. Okay, a lot of people today, what they do is they said, "Oh, I'm not going to go that route. I'm going to work Fidelity in a call center." Seriously. So when somebody calls up, Fidelity will pay me to answer the phone. That's a whole different cat. They're an employee of a company. These are people that want to own their own financial planning company. They want to be a financial planner. The industry I work in, and half of them will fail within 1 year, and 90% will fail in 5 years. So what does it take to succeed? Just dogged determination. And they don't teach you that in any school book. They don't teach you in any class. It's an intangible that they have no metrics to show. And where somebody's used to the ups and downs of the financial services industry. Speaking of a person who's actually survived the financial services industry, we have Shaquille Latmer. Lord knows how he survived it, but he is what I call a survivor because he's still in the financial services industry, I believe, after 5 years. Most people
along those same lines, and Shaquille,
most people in Shaquille's line of business are out of business in 5 years. So.
But Shaquille, you mentioned about massive risk, and that was something that the gentleman that I was on Clubhouse with was talking about, was that he was feeling that a lot of people aren't willing to take those risks. And like I said, he called them toe tippers, that just kind of like tip their toes in entrepreneurship and don't really go into it wholeheartedly and everything. And that's why he was thinking that it wasn't just in the U.S. I think he was actually saying that it was around the Western nations and everything all along those lines. And like I said, I'm hoping to get Joe, and I can't think of Joe's last name, or even he revealed his last name, but I'm hoping to get him on one of our shows to share his thoughts and everything. But what is your thoughts around that? Because he definitely was very adamant, and he's written a couple of books about it, that there is a lack of entrepreneurship spirit around the West, more so than there used to be and everything. And he feels that that has been hurting the West. And I was wondering your take on that, and if that is something that you would be concerned about as well.
Well, I think there's a couple of things at play. Firstly, there's an enormous amount of risk that a person takes when they want to go out on their own. People thought I was crazy. Even I thought I was crazy when I left the safety of a large financial institutional bank in order to go off on my own at 27. I mean, I tried doing it when I was 23. And it took me many years to try and get somewhere. And along that journey, there were some really bad times. There were times when, I couldn't afford to pay, the electricity bill and the gas bill. And I'm like, look, I'll put $50 on it today, and I'll put $100 on the gas. And what am I going to do with the groceries? Like, it was tough. It was really hard. And I think that there were people around me in my life, especially my former partner, who would look at me and say, why are we living like this? And I can understand why she would get quite frustrated, because I could have easily earned, very high incomes if I was working for banks or other types of financial institutions. But I gave that up in order to focus on something else. So, I think those people that become more successful, when you feel as though you're being constantly told by society that somehow you've exploited everybody else, that somehow you not wanting to hand over, vast amounts, not a little bit in tax, but, half of your income in taxes, and you not wanting to hand that over is just you being greedy, you being the nemesis of society. I think that's very hurtful. But more importantly, Ricky made a comment there about billionaires, tech billionaires, doubling their net worth, a lot of them, in the last handful of years, and that being exploitative. Well, who are they exploiting exactly? The free market is what's driving up these share prices. But I want to come back to a point about what we're seeing, and the reason why I very often talk about over government regulation and why that holds us back. The United States, theoretically speaking, is actually quite a capitalist society, but it also has a lot of hurdles to running some businesses. Now, there are other businesses that are really lightly regulated. And those businesses that are lightly regulated is where you see the most amount of growth. And it's because someone like Jeff Bezos can, start a company using $300,000, I think is the story, from friends and family, and start up Amazon. Now, I remember when Amazon first sort of came onto the scene, and I thought, why would anybody bother? You've already got eBay. Why would anybody go to Amazon? Well, I buy stuff off Amazon. I can't remember the last time I bought something on eBay. So, you know, people take these sorts of risks. But when there's not very many regulations standing in their way, they're more willing to try different things. And some people might want the safety and security of having a regular income while they're trying these other things. But when you've got really vast and complicated regulations with really harsh penalties, that I think puts an element of fear into people. It makes people go, well, do I really want to do this? Do I really want to take this kind of a risk, not just financially, but, you know, there's cases where somebody had packaged fish incorrectly. After 25 years of doing that, he lost everything because the government of the United States came after him. John Stossel did a story on him. He lost everything. And of course, while he was in jail for 8 years on a very vague law, his wife left. You know, he didn't get to see his kids, all that sort of stuff. That's the thing that I think holds back many, what I would say, legacy countries. One second, Rick. United States, Canada, Australia, etc. I think we hold ourselves back, and the tech industry is a very good example of this. If you go back 20 or 30 years ago, it was the Wild West. And so anybody could kind of start something up, and maybe it would work, maybe it wouldn't. And look at the amount of growth that you've got. But now if you wanted to set up a tech company, if you, for example, wanted to compete with Google, or if you wanted to compete with, I don't know, any of these big companies that are out there, your ability to do so is going to be made a lot harder because of regulations. And I've said that before, when big companies advocate for regulations, they're actually cementing their position of power and making it harder for new innovation and new ideas to actually come to the forefront. Rick.
Hey, Rick,
go ahead, Rick. There's a term for that, which is like regulatory capture. When big companies via political lobbyists and political contributions own the legislators who make the rules and bend those rules to favor the big companies. But government stuff aside, not everybody is cut out to have some huge new idea, and not even a huge new idea. I recommend watching Shark Tank. My wife is entrepreneurial. We've been watching it the whole time it's been on. And you get to see what looks like an excellent idea just get shot down in flames when these experienced, sharks explain why, it's a neat idea, but it just won't fly. I know a guy who's sold quite a few TV shows, and I asked him, on average, how many meetings do you think you have to take before you sell a show? Going around to different people and then meeting with them again as you develop. He said 100. Not everybody is cut out to just be balls to the wall, taking 100 frickin' meetings to sell one TV show.
No, that's very true and everything. Just really quickly.
This is a reflection of life, though, isn't it? Right. Like say I'm single. Okay. Now I'm sure that if I went out and asked 20 girls out every day, I'm eventually going to find a girl who's going to come out with me who I'm going to like, right? That's eventually going to happen. I'm not prepared to take some of the risk, but two, I can't really be bothered. That's not the place I'm in life at the moment. I'm focusing on other things. But I can't then complain that my lack of having a female in my life right now is somehow like a conspiracy. Society is denying me this, and look at the other people that have got a really happy marriage, if such a thing exists. And that's the problem that I think we see in the business world, is you've got people who aren't prepared to take certain risks, who are then complaining that the people at the top are hoarding it all. And they forget that people at the top move in and out of that bracket. The last couple of years was a bit tough for me. This year is going to be fantastic. 2020 was fantastic. 2021, 2022 is a bit ordinary for me. So, I mean, you have these ebbs and flows. I just don't think it's right for people to be constantly attacking those people with money. And
but Shaquille, just really quickly, because the Oxfam recently put out, I think it was yesterday, their annual inequality report, and they said that the 5 wealthiest people on the earth have become a whole lot richer in recent years. Since 2020, these billionaires' net worth, and they include folks that you mentioned, like Jeff Bezos, Warren Buffett, Bernard Arnault, Larry Ellison, and Elon Musk, have skyrocketed 114% to a total of 869 billion after taking inflation into account. And if current trend continues, the world could see its first trillionaire in a decade.
Mark,
and at the same time, hold on a second. At the same time, nearly 5 billion people globally have become poorer as they contend with inflation, war, and what some people are saying is a climate crisis.
Hang on a second. You're conflating a number of things. The increase in wealth of those 5 individuals is not necessarily at the cost of those people at the bottom. Okay, and just take, for example, the United States. If we're going to talk about the U.S. economy, the U.S. economy, arguably, and the argument being put forth at the moment by the Biden administration Democrats, is that the U.S. economy is outperforming and has outperformed its peer group. And on the numbers right now, that would appear to be the case. I'll get you to Toby. You're up next. Just let me just finish this real quick. That would appear to be the case. Now, economists, I think, are going to have to study this period of time for decades to come, because in economics, it's very hard to work out what's right and wrong in a given situation. The US, yes, inflation's down, interest rates are up. So that's part of the reason why inflation's come down. 2, we've seen the supply chain disruptions, and there's a bit more supply, there's a bit more smoothness in the supply chain. But the other major factor that sets the United States apart from its peer group is that the US increased its deficit very substantially from what it was before. Now, the question is going to be, was that a good or a bad idea? Personally, I tend to think it actually might have been a good idea, because we know that money is going to circulate through, and then through taxes, it will come back to the government. So as long as there is a plan for how to repay that deficit, that may well have been a very good idea. And perhaps the US has made a better decision than, for example, Europe has on this point. But that's something that economists will debate over time. So what we're then talking about is, well, where has that money gone? We know a lot of that money went into the stock market. We know that a lot of that money went into harder assets like real estate. So what happened? Well, it meant that some people, not just the rich, but some of the middle class, were able to experience an increase in their net worth. Some of the older people in the middle class were perhaps able to see an increase in investment properties and things like that, and then look at leaving the workforce and retiring a little bit early during that COVID period of time. Other people who are struggling, who are trying to rent a property, especially young people who are trying to move out of home for the first time, have found that relative to their income, because when unions ask for wages to go up, it's a lag. That wage increase lags inflation. It's not the cause of inflation, as people on the right would often say. So what you see is people struggling in one sector of the society, and that's generally younger people and lower income people, and people who are already wealthy or upper middle class getting a little bit richer. But then you say, well, okay, well, what are we going to do about that? You want to have full socialism? Should we just divide all the assets equally? I don't think those are realistic solutions. So it's one thing to say these people have become much wealthier. That's because their asset values have increased. I think that you'll find that if Elon Musk wanted to sell all of his shares in all the companies he owns, he would struggle to liquidate it at its current value. Mm-hmm. And secondly, they haven't gotten wealthier because they've caused a war in the Ukraine and Russia, or they've caused a conflict in Palestine and Israel, or any of the other many conflicts around the world that we don't talk about. There's still issues in Nigeria, for example. There's hopefully not going to be a civil war, but it certainly looks like that in South Africa. There seems to be a lot of issues. So those people at the top are not saying, well, let's cause a war because we want to get richer. There's a problem somewhere. I recognize that. I don't think the solution is socialism, and I don't think it's fair to then use the statistics and say, well, those people got richer, these people got poorer, so therefore cause and effect. Because to try to fix that cause and effect, you're going to try and legislate something. You're going to try and create a rule or a law, and that just doesn't do a very good job often of achieving the goals that you wanted. Jacoby was up next.
Yeah, Jacoby's up.
Just to point out, I mean, I do think there definitely still has to be regulation, because even in the situations where we're talking about one group getting richer and one group getting poorer, there is a cause and effect there, because in instances, for example, even in the fish example that you had talked about earlier, the reason that individual went to jail was because he had mislabeled his salmon, and his salmon was actually cornering the market, and he had mislabeled it to 1.3. That's what the article says.
I think we're talking about different instances.
Okay, well, That's where one individual who had a fish business went to jail for a year due to the fact of mislabeling. He was cornering the market on salmon. So that's an example of how those at the top sometimes trying to corner the market, just as we talk about businesses pushing out, Walmart pushing out mom and pop stores, big farms, those corporate farms pushing out those individual farmers and those smaller farmers. So there is a problem there that we still have to address because it's not going away. And yes, there are individuals, it's not 100%, it's because nothing is 100%, but there are individuals that do at the top profit off of those and push those at the bottom. And Google, well, actually all the Google buying up different assets, Microsoft buying up smaller assets, pushing them out of the market. That happens and it's there. It's just regulations. We definitely still need them to protect those smaller entities. And I think those regulations, yes, some of them I completely agree. Keep those top corporate businesses in business. Some of them, though, do protect those smaller entrepreneurs that are trying to do business. And I don't think, and
hold on a second, Shaquille. Jatovia, because I was actually going to bring up one other point that's still somewhat related and everything. One, they said workers have been flexing their muscle through strikes and deals. We saw that with Hollywood. We saw that with the truckers in Canada that better their compensation and working conditions. I'm glad you brought up Walmart because actually the guy Joe brought that up as well because he was actually arguing that if you have a good enough business, it won't matter if Walmart moves next to you because your product and your ability to survive will be good. You just have to create a good enough product to compete with Walmart, even if Walmart moves next to you. And I'm not saying that I totally agree with what he said, but it did make a little bit of sense and everything. But one of the things that I know you talk about quite a bit, and we've talked about it on the show, and even Steve, when he's here, brings it up. But another report that came out said that nearly 40%, that's almost half, of global employment could be disrupted by AI. And we just saw a story recently where literally your fast food person that takes your money as well as the person that prepares the burger could be replaced by AI and everything. So is that something that we need to be concerned about? And will that also further disrupt the disparity between those?
I'd like to respond to Jatovia, but I think Rick's up next.
All right. Yeah, a couple of things. I agree with Shaquille that you can't entirely blame the billionaires for their fortunes doubling. COVID locked us down, and that benefited the FANG companies. At the same time, you kind of hope that they wouldn't be dicks about it. But frickin' Elon Musk is half a lunatic. He burned through $32 billion of value. I know it's, it's not actual until you try to sell it, but took Twitter from being worth maybe 44 billion to being worth 12 billion and turned it into a shithole just because he has weird ideas of like personal, first, I don't know, just he garbaged it up and it was useful and now it's a mess. And then like Bezos and people having to, not allowed to take bathroom breaks and pissing into bottles, we need, the UK government created a new minister, the Minister of Common Sense, which seems like bullshit to me. But I wish the US government would create the Department of the Future to figure out how the future might work. We can try a bunch of stuff, and not all of it is frickin' socialism, but we can't try anything right now because our legislative branch is paralyzed by yahoos.
Let me respond to a couple of things. Firstly, with Jatovia's comments. Look, on the Walmart example, we've got two major grocery companies here in Australia. One's called Woolworths, one's called Coles, and there's a third one called Aldi, which I think is beginning to get a footprint in the United States.
It is.
Now, Woolworths and Coles have been accused of during COVID of price gouging, and I think that they have been doing that. There's a government inquiry here about it. But my concern is, what's the government going to do? Is the government going to put a limit on how much of an increase or how much of a profit you can charge at your point of sale versus what the wholesale price is? Because this creates other issues. I would prefer to see more competition in the market. But it's very hard to compete. And I think the United States would have the same issue because there's not a lot of small grocery stores in the United States. There's Whole Foods, Walmart, a few others. But, that's where people are going to go shopping. So, trying to get that competition in is an issue. But Rick, over to your point. Look, firstly, it is his money. So saying that he's being a dick about it, he's taken all sorts of risks before. He took a big risk in even trying to start Tesla up in the first place, and he's had some success there. I think there is a lot of bias out there, and you're a smart guy. I'm not saying that you're blind to the bias, but to say, well, he's doing the wrong thing with Twitter/X. What about BlackRock, who lost $1 trillion because of their DEI and their ESG scores, where they set up a fund, and they're the first fund in history that lost $1 trillion. But because they're on the side of the Democrats, I don't see Democrats or the Labour Party or any centre-left parties around the world saying, well, instead of throwing that $1 trillion away, trying to do something new to make the world more inclusive, you should have just given it to us. You should have just given it to charity. You don't see that happening. But when people on the right do it, they get criticised. And again, I think what you end up with is you end up with people who have small businesses that say, look, if I take a particular political position which isn't popular, then I could find myself, struggling to survive because I get a whole heap of bad reviews. And two examples. One was a store in California. She put an LGBTQ flag up or a rainbow flag up, and she got criticized for that by people on the right. You've also seen people on the right that
she got shot. She got killed. That our neighbor put up because she had an LG. Yeah.
Well, this wasn't a neighbor. This was a shop. This wasn't her house. But one
no,
example.
She got killed because of the gay flag in front of her shop.
We've also seen on the right where people have perhaps put up an American flag or a Trump flag and have been attacked for that. This is the sort of thing that small businesses, I think, are under a lot of pressure. There's politics, all these other things that are affecting you. And I think that it's fair enough that you're going to see some people like Elon Musk trying to do something different or trying to give a bit of an outlet to people who feel like they're forgotten.
The only reason I know I'm so pissed at Musk is because I live on Twitter and he turned it into. Yesterday, I reported 16 Twitter accounts that were putting out, the Hitler drawing of Jews with the hook nose and like the greedy and strangling the pure white people. I found out
yourself place, Mark. There's a lot of
so,
outside.
so I was just going to point out that actually John Oliver actually did a great piece on Musk.
Can you mute yourself, Mark? Because there's a lot of interference. It's a struggle to hear what Rick's saying. Thank you. Rick, sorry.
I reported 16 accounts that were doing super hard, Nazi level anti-Jew propaganda. And I've yet to receive a report that any of them have violated the current Twitter rules. And he's turned it into a place where all sorts of vile stuff can thrive. And yeah, I'm not as aware about BlackRock because I don't spend all day on BlackRock.
Yeah, but I don't agree that that's what he's done. I mean, I think that you can say vile things on other media outlets as well. They just may not be affecting you. Right?
No,
but other people are affected by other things that happen on other media and social media platforms.
So just to point out, John Oliver actually did a great piece on Elon Musk. And Elon Musk didn't really build up Twitter, build up anything. He purchased mostly everything. He purchased Tesla, purchased SpaceX, purchased Twitter, and these things. And with Twitter, for example, Rick is right. He did open the floodgates to a lot of hate speech. He really did. There was a study done that talked about how anti-Semitism, the use of the N-word, and all these other things spiked when Elon Musk bought it and took it over. And that's not, it was his calling card to say, I'm a champion of freedom of speech, which being on Twitter or your access to Twitter has nothing to do with freedom of speech, because freedom of speech deals with government stopping your speech. It's not Twitter or a business stopping your speech or not allowing you to use their social media platform. So it has nothing to do with freedom of speech. I'm just saying I'm just trying to agree with Rick that the spike itself happened because that was his calling card.
Well, let me respond.
Determined
Let me
to
respond to
allow for
Throughout the hour.
individuals to say whatever and do whatever, unless it was against him or against Tesla, because he actually blocked people and articles that were about him on Twitter. He blocked more.
Can I respond? We're at the hour, so let me respond to you.
I was just going to finish this one point, but okay.
Okay, we'll keep going then, and I won't say.
Go. It's okay. We're at the hour. Go.
So, firstly, what you guys are defining as being hate speech is not necessarily what other people are defining as being hate speech.
Please don't start off that way, because that's a false equivalence. Because there's an actual definition of hate speech that the UN even uses. So we're talking about.
Can I finish my sentence or not? If the answer is no, just tell me and I'll go.
But please don't do the disingenuous.
So Jacoby, if I can't finish my sentence,
go ahead and finish your thought.
What you say, then you give me the rules.
Jack, you said that you work at the UN or been to the UN. You know there's a defined definition of hate speech. So don't come out saying that if it's not you, then it's not hate speech. There's a definition, and that's what we're talking about.
You done?
Go ahead, Shaquille.
Are you sure? So you started to go into a bit of a legal argument there about whether or not the First Amendment only applies to when government does it or whether corporations do it. I think there are laws about this and precedent laws about this anyway. And I think there's a big argument for people saying that some of these things is basically the digital public square and it has some utility value. But I would say that I think the tech companies are in a difficult position here. Because on the one hand, when we've seen things that have gone wrong, and we've certainly seen, for example, young children or young teenagers, especially, that have been targeted online, people have asked the tech companies to step in. They've asked for the tech companies to stop things like online bullying. And they've got to balance that up with free speech. But I also would say that I don't think we should allow the tech companies or force the tech companies to be the only people policing this. Things that are actually hate speech, things that actually are discriminatory, things that do rise to that level, there are already laws in place about that. Now, I think, again, you've got to be careful about what you do here, because the UK, we know that people have started being targeted by the police for things they've said online, and that seems like an overreach. We don't want to have the underreach that I think the United States is going through, where they're just relying on the tech platforms to do it. Because it's very hard to keep different groups happy and all groups happy. So I think that we really need to have that conversation about what's actually allowable, what's not, and whether certain speech that's offensive is actually allowed, even if it is deeply offensive to a majority of people.
Every social media platform has a code of conduct, and you agree to those code of conduct and those disciplinary actions when you sign on to the actual service. So those tech companies have to abide by the rules and regulations that they create and that we should have to abide by as well.
Well,
so
they frequently change them.
Yeah, just really quickly, they do change them, because I'm actually fighting LinkedIn right now because of some things that they said I didn't do. So I'm actually having to go through the whole notion of reestablishing the LinkedIn account and everything. So definitely that can happen as well. But we're getting ready to go. I just put in the link to Economics Monday and everything. So we're getting ready to end the show, but it's a very interesting conversation. We'll be back tomorrow with more stories around the news and everything. But I did put in the link for those that want to join Economics Monday.